To this afternoon's public conversation between Mr. Fred Zeidman, Chairman Emeritus of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council, and Dr. Rachel Gross, a professor at Virginia Tech University and a former fellow with us at the John C. Danforth Center on Religion and Politics. I'm Lee Schmidt, acting director of the center, filling in this academic year for my colleague, Marie Griffith. The Danforth Center is very pleased to have the Jewish Federation of St. Louis, as well as the Holocaust Museum and Learning Center as co-sponsors of today's events. We are delighted to have these partnerships in the wider St. Louis community. As I hope many of you know already, the mission of the Danforth Center is to serve as a nonpartisan, research-oriented, public-minded institute for fostering rigorous scholarship and for informing broader audiences about the intersections of religion and U.S. politics. I invite you to join our email list, to contact us with any questions or feedback, and to follow our online journal on religion and politics, which features writing by various academics, journalists, and commentators from across the country. I want to offer a special word of thanks up front to Sonny Bellows, Gene Cavender, Deborah Kennard, Sherry Pena, and Andrew Rayfeld for all they did to help make this event possible. My warmest thanks to all of them. We are honored to be hosting Fred Zeidman and Rachel Gross today, and for the opportunity to hear them discuss together the Holocaust and American public memory. Mr. Zeidman, a distinguished undergraduate alumnus of Washington University from the class of 1968, went on to receive his MBA from New York University in 1970. His leadership roles in finance, education, politics, and public service have been numerous in the decades since his graduation from WashU. Among his many responsibilities, he has served as chairman of the Southwest Region Anti-Defamation League, vice president and director of the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, vice chairman of the Board of Regents at Texas Southern University, and vice chair of the University of Texas Health Science Center. He is also a partner with the Washington Nationals, and usually we'd be happy to recognize that as well, except that the Nationals beat the Cardinals last night. In March 2002, Mr. Zeidman was appointed chairman of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council by President George W. Bush, a position he continued to hold through 2010. The governing board of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the council plays a critical role in supporting and guiding the museum as the nation's signature institution dedicated to preserving the stories of survivors and victims of the Nazi regime, a beacon in the nation's capital for confronting genocide and anti-Semitism. It is our profound honor to have Mr. Zeidman here to discuss his experiences leading the council, as well as his own ongoing engagement with the issues at the heart of the Holocaust Museum's charge. We are also pleased as well to welcome back Professor Rachel Gross, a research fellow at the Danforth Center in 2013-2014. Professor Gross received her PhD from the Department of Religion at Princeton University, where she completed her dissertation entitled Objects of Affection, the Material Religion of American Jewish Nostalgia. Focused on practices of American Jewish memory in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, her book, In the Making, examines Jewish longing for the communal homelands of Eastern Europe, as well as familiar New World neighborhoods, particularly New York's Lower East Side. While with us at the Danforth Center, she taught a popular undergraduate course called Food Fights, The Politics of American Jewish Consumption. Among the classes she teaches at Virginia Tech is the Holocaust, Cataclysm, and Representation. We're delighted to have this opportunity to reconnect with her. I was reminded anew last week of the importance of today's event, as well as our vocation at the Danforth Center, when reading a piece in the Washington Post by James Comey, the current director of the FBI. The Post printed Comey's commentary under the headline, Why I Require FBI Agents to Visit the Holocaust Museum, an excerpt of his speech he gave at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's 2015 National Tribute Dinner, part of the museum's observance of Holocaust Remembrance Day. Comey, an Irish Catholic, noted that he required every new FBI special agent and intelligence analyst to go to the museum not only to confront the unfathomable inhumanity of the Holocaust. He sends them there also, he said, to see the sinister humanity of it, the human susceptibility to rationalization and moral surrender, the human capacity for evil. I want them to walk out of that great museum treasuring the constraint and oversight of divided government, the restriction of the rule of law, the binding of a free and vibrant press. I want them to understand that all of this is necessary as a check on us because of the way we are. In the run-up to this event, I have to admit that I was not expecting to read a religious and philosophical reflection on the significance of the Holocaust Museum from the current director of the FBI. But then I noticed that he mentioned that he had majored in religious studies in college, and then I found out even that he'd worked on a senior thesis comparing the public engagement of two critically important, if wildly different, religious figures of the last century, Reinhold Niebuhr and Jerry Falwell. The study of American religion and politics came together to form him in crucial ways at a young age. And one can hear the Niebuhrian echoes of that education in the way he thinks about his public service, including the way he works to educate his own agents and analysts. Through events like this one and through our wider enterprise, the Danforth Center aims to nurture that kind of learning and critical awareness among its own students. The Jewish philosopher Emil Fackenheim, himself a survivor of the Nazi regime, considered remembering the Holocaust a new commandment of modern Jewish life, one of the ways in which the Jewish people, as he said, refused Hitler any posthumous victories. We are commanded, he wrote, to remember on our very guts and bones the martyrs of the Holocaust, lest their memory perish. It is to that work of public memory that the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum is dedicated, and is with great esteem that we welcome Fred Zeidman and Rachel Gross back to Washington University to discuss that institution's role in American public life. Please join me in welcoming them.
This is real time, Rachel. Which side do you want? So, okay, that's good. So, thank you. Thank all of you for coming today. It's going to be great. We got here so late, I didn't get to see any of my friends and fraternity brothers. I did get to see Dr. Virgil, who played such a great part in my early life at this school. I'm always thrilled to be in your company. And I also want to thank all of you Cardinal fans for giving us some hope that we might be able to beat you, although we never can seem to do that in October. You made it rough last night, 10 innings, but we got there. So anyway, what a thrill to be back on this campus. I mentioned to Rachel before, and I haven't seen anybody for any of my fraternity brothers that are here. You might remember this, but there we are. So everybody gets their 5 minutes of fame in life, and I thought mine was over after Animal House came out, and I started the food fight. So my roommate and I figured that was it. But I've had the most incredible opportunity I could have ever had in President Bush having allowed me the opportunity to chair the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And it far surpassed anything I ever thought I was going to have an opportunity to be involved in. I didn't realize when I got there, I thought this was ceremonial. And interestingly enough, the president had said to me this was my reward for something I had done for him before. And I got there, and there was just tremendous turmoil at the museum. And I was being brought receptionists to approve every day and secretaries. And I said, I'm the chairman of the board. Why am I getting this? They said, no, you're also the CEO. I said, okay, well, we've got to change that at some point. But it really threw me into a world that I could never have imagined, and the thrill and the rewards of having that opportunity to work with survivors and to follow in the footsteps of Elie Wiesel is, again, something that, as I walked this campus 50 years ago, never thought would have happened to a little country boy from Morton, Texas. So,
Mr. Zeidman, I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. As Lee mentioned, I write and teach about the politics of Jewish memory, including teaching a course on Holocaust history and memory at Virginia Tech. And you've had such a hand in shaping a particularly important part of how a particular part of modern Jewish history is represented to national and international audiences. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I also want to say thank you very much to Lee Schmidt in particular, and to everyone at the Danforth Center for inviting me to participate in this event. I'm so thrilled to return to the Danforth Center. As a dissertation fellow here last year, I had an extraordinarily productive and enjoyable year here, and many of you in this room will know how rare and winning that combination is. So, Mr. Zeidman, as you know, I have a few questions for you, and we'll have a conversation before we allow the audience to join us in the conversation. So we might begin, if you could tell us how you would describe the role or the roles of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum.
well, interestingly enough, Rachel, I think the role has changed significantly, and it was really the reason I wanted to do that. I was the first non-survivor to chair the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And the survivor generation built that museum, paid for that museum. Again, the federal government gave the land to the museum under the understanding that they would build it. They built a museum sort of under the theory that you build it and they will come, and they have, and they've come in droves. But my feeling was there are 280, 300 million people in America. They can't all come to that museum. And so the job that we had was to take the museum to them. It was to transition that museum to a non-survivor generation. And the museum is so critical, and that's why it's on the mall, so that the whole world can see that this is important to the United States of America. I was interviewed one day, and they said, what do you think? And I'm sitting in my office, and I said, look out the window. I said, there is the Washington Monument. There is the Pentagon. And twice a day, the President of the United States, when he was traveling, comes right by my window in his helicopter. Mm-hmm. Now, if that's not telling you what the role that this museum plays, if you think about American exceptionalism and you think about American leadership in this world, it is imperative that the United States of America take the lead in that. And I think that obviously, other than Yad Vashem, we were the first country to recognize the horrors of the Holocaust and to make sure that we presented an opportunity to everybody in the world to see it. So to me, that got it.
As someone who teaches about the Holocaust, I know precisely how valuable your online contributions are. They're immensely valuable to me as an instructor and to my students learning about the Holocaust. So thank you for those contributions.
Well, thank you. One of the, again, in this effort to do that, one of the things that I encountered when I got there was, of course, at this period of time, as not only the survivor generation was dissipating, so were all the artifacts and documentation, not only naturally disintegrating, but being destroyed in some of these foreign countries. And so we really had a tremendous chore to try and grab as much as we could. And one of the things that I had decided to do that I thought was so important was to invest in the digitization and putting everything online. And we were spending so much time and so much effort along with Yad Vashem, going through all of Eastern Europe and all the satellite countries, chasing artifacts and trying to grab them. And I said to our partners at Yad Vashem, why don't you do that? And let me devote my money to something that I think is much, much more important, and that's going online so that the rest of the world has access to all of this information. So I'm glad to see we did something right.
You've done a beautiful job with it. It's really impressive. And it hints at a very broad audience. Can you tell us a little bit about who you think the audiences are that you'd like to reach and that you do reach?
Well, I wish I hadn't been gone 5 years because I could quote all of those statistics, and I'm not sure I can do it anymore, and I'm sure they've changed. But we found in the focus groups that we were able to do, to reach, I mean, first of all, we're reaching a worldwide audience. We were in, I don't know, 13 or 14 different languages. We found an amazing number of statistics that, among other things, 85 to 90% of the people who were going online were not Jewish. They were people studying the history. They were studying the lessons of the Holocaust. And to me, you know, I said when I got there that my main job is to teach the lessons of the Holocaust so that they won't be repeated. That's my obligation to the survivors.
Absolutely. So you have visitors who are all kinds of different backgrounds, Jewish and not Jewish.
Correct.
Do you think of the institution itself as a Jewish institution? What kind of institution is it? Is it a religious institution or a political one?
Are we going to be in the paper? Are we going to be in the paper on this? Well, let me tell you. Thank you. I don't believe you asked me that question. I guess I should have known. You gave me a hint. But let me tell you one of the things that we faced when I got there. And again, if you look at the history of this museum and the way it was put together, and it was built by Holocaust survivors, and they wanted this to be their story, which was the Jewish story. There were 17 million people killed in the Holocaust. 6 million of them were Jews. The Jews were the only ones that were killed totally because of religion without any knowledge of anything else. We were a federally funded museum. They did not fund a Jewish museum. They funded a museum of the Holocaust to reflect the Poles, the Russians, the Gypsies, everyone that was killed in that museum. One of the big battles, if you will, that I had when I got there was this battle between, are we a Jewish museum or are we a museum of the Holocaust? To me, we were a museum of the Holocaust. We were not a museum of anti-Semitism, except as to the extent that it related to the Holocaust. So I was not going to deal with individual instances of anti-Semitism. We formed some phenomenal alliances with several organizations, the Anti-Defamation League being lead among them, to deal with those anti-Semitism issues. One of the exhibits, we really had to fight this battle because there was so much anti-Semitism. And our decision was that we could only do that as it related to genocide. And so we designed some exhibits that showed how early anti-Semitism in the 30s evolved into the Holocaust. So that's been an ongoing issue forever, and obviously as anti-Semitism has spread and become more and more recognized, the good thing, Lee, just like not having to deal with the FBI director this week, I haven't had to deal with those issues either. So, but that was always an issue, and from everything that I can tell, my successors, President Obama did a marvelous job of picking a successor to me. There were folks that were on museum with me and have kept that on track, in that we have to deal with the modern day world. We have to deal with the post-survivor generation. We have to deal with their legacy. And to make this a museum of just the Jewish Holocaust, that's the story it tells. Mm-hmm. But it acknowledges everyone else was killed in it as well, and we have to focus on that. And we don't have to focus we tried to keep it away from focusing just on anti-Semitism and individual acts of anti-Semitism, other than the way it might relate. So that was a major, major challenge, and it was a major battle, if you will, with the survivor generation who did not want us dealing at all with anything other than their story. And if you go through the museum, there is nothing from the first floor up that relates to anything other than the story of the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you've also chosen select ways to deal with other kinds of genocides. I know the Holocaust Museum was very involved in the genocide, in activism against the genocide in Darfur and other issues. Can you tell us about how you made those choices?
Right. That was actually the first big challenge when I got there. If you look at the Rwandan genocide, there was no acknowledgement of that at the museum or anywhere else, and the genocide happened. Elie Wiesel, in his brilliance, created a committee on conscience. The museum never, which was to deal with modern day genocide, the museum never allocated any money to it on purpose, because they didn't, again, the survivor generation did not want to move anything away from their story. And so I realized that if we're going to be a museum of the Holocaust, if we're going to teach the lessons of the Holocaust, we had to relate it to modern times and genocide again. And we'd gone through the Rwandan genocide. The man, we did have enough, who was at that time heading the Committee on Conscience, I had said to him, I'm going to allocate whatever you need to make your job important here. And he came to me one day and he said, I think there is a genocide about to start or starting in Darfur, and I want to go see. And I said, well, here's the deal. I can't send you into a genocide. I'm not going to send you into a war zone. If you want to go, go. And I promise you I'll pay for it and I'll reimburse you. And he went and he spent, I don't know, a month, I don't know how many weeks he spent, and he came back with tons of pictures of what was going on over there. And there was no question that there was a genocide. And we took the lead in that, and we took it to the White House, and we said, we want you to see what's going on in Darfur. We took it to the United Nations as well. And the White House declared a genocide, and I can tell you that that was fully attributable to the homework that we had done, because to me that was exactly what we were there for. So we got heavily, heavily involved in that. And of course, again, we only get involved in genocide, right? So if you look at the war in Iraq and whatever was happening in Syria and the chemical warfare, I mean, those how do you make decisions as to whether or not you're in a civil war, a religious war, right, or a true genocide? Rwanda was a genocide. Darfur was a genocide. You can make the case that these others have been genocides, but they were religious wars. There were fighting, on both sides. And I think the museum smartly has not gotten involved in some of that, although, again, a lot of that's been since me, so I didn't have to deal with that. But among the many things that I'm exceptionally proud of is the focus or the emphasis that we put on the Committee on Conscience. And I will tell you, and I hope it's on film and I hope it's online, probably the single most impactful program that we ever put on. And I mean, to this day, I get chills when I think about it. We put a program on where we had a Holocaust survivor, a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, and a survivor of Darfur. And we put this on at the museum. And the Holocaust survivor says, didn't you learn anything from me? And the Rwandan survivor said, didn't you learn anything from me? And the Darfur survivor is sitting there saying, are you going to learn anything from me this time? We've all been through this. And to me, this is what the museum needs to do. The museum had to migrate from being just a history of that Holocaust to the lessons of the Holocaust so that we could teach this generation And yeah, you missed my session with the students, but they said, what's the takeaway here? And I said, the takeaway is each of you need to learn that you have an obligation to never forget. You have an obligation to see that museum, to see what humans are capable of doing to humans, and to make sure it doesn't happen again. That needs to be your takeaway. It's not only your responsibility, it's your obligation. So I couldn't be more proud of that transition, because they really had sublimated the role of the Committee on Conscience, only wanting to be a museum of the Holocaust. So.
And perhaps that role is, do you see that role hinted at in the dual nature of the Memorial Museum, that there was a choice to call this particular place a memorial and a museum? Is that role hinted at there?
Yeah, correct. It is a memorial. It's a memorial to the 6 million. It's but because it has such a Jewish influence, it's a memorial to the 17 million. And don't forget what you learned here when you walk out that door. And I said earlier today, one of the things that used to fascinate me, I used to love to watch the kids that were on their 6th and 7th grade tours, 8th grade tours, come dancing into the museums in the morning. We're going to go see another museum. And then to watch them come out of the museum 2 or 3 hours later, and to see the impact that this has had on them when they have seen, you know, the tragedy of what can happen and what can happen overnight, and to read the notes that they're writing in the, one of the things I commented on, and I don't remember if I did when we were together at lunch or the other, and I apologize, having done this 3 times now. I don't remember which story I've told where, but all right, this is the 4th time. But the thing that has been the most impactful in that museum, of course, has been the shoes. But to me, the thing that was most impactful is the 3 levels of photographs. Because if you go to for all of you who have been to the museum, let me tell you what impacted me. I mean, you're looking at a guy that grew up in a farm town in South Texas with 3,000 people in it. So we couldn't even spell Holocaust down there. I mean, who knew? But you go and look at this picture, and in the first picture, everyone they're having picnics, they're going to the bank, they're riding bicycles, the kids are playing in the park, they're doing everything that we do today. And you go down to the next floor, and you look at the next floor, and this is 1 year later, and they're now in a ghetto, and they're locked in a ghetto. And you go down 1 more level, and you're in the 3rd level, and you're looking at pictures, and they're all dead. And what that is teaching all of us is how quickly this can happen if we're not vigilant. So it's vitally important that we have a memorial. It's vitally important that the world knows that the United States of America is aware of this every day. That the President of the United States, sitting in his office, if you're in the Oval Office and you spin your chair around, you're staring at the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And that we are not going to let this happen again. So to have that memorial right there and to see it viewed, this ain't the Smithsonian, right? You don't get to see the moonwalk, right? You don't get to see the dinosaurs. I mean, and yet we're getting over 2 million people a year, and they're not all Jewish. Right? 6 million Jews in America. We get 2 million people a year. If every Jew in America came to the museum, they could have done it in 3 years, right? So the fact that we're now, 35 to 40 million people have been through that museum is going to show you how we resonate, and that's the lesson that has to be taught. That's the lesson that this world needs to know, and that's the lesson that we continue to try and promulgate.
Absolutely.
And by the way, if you ever, I guess all the networks, their cameras are on top of the Chamber of Commerce building, and when you watch CNN, I don't know about Fox, I don't remember. I hate to see, everybody knows I'm a Republican, but I watch CNN. But the camera, because I know what Fox is going to tell me. God knows what CNN's going to tell me every day, so I watch that. But the camera is on top of the Chamber of Commerce building, so when they show every day, when America looks at CNN showing the White House, if you just look right past it, it's heading, you can see the United States Holocaust Museum right there. And to me, that's resonating for everybody in this country, right in the world, every day. And I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. In fact, that speaks to the question I was going to ask you next about the fact that this museum is on American soil. And I wonder if you can speak to both the opportunities, I think you've spoken a little bit about the opportunities that it has to be a Holocaust museum in DC and in the United States, but also if there are difficulties with being a Holocaust museum on American soil rather than on European soil where the atrocities happened.
Well, first of all, I think that that's a phenomenal question, and I think it speaks to what we have talked about. The Holocaust Museum was conceived under President Carter, and they spent the next 15 years trying to put it together. But I think if you look back historically, until they announced that the United States was going to build a Holocaust memorial and a Holocaust museum, I don't think, and it's funny because if you look in the newspaper, that's why the only reason I brought this up here is because I have today's and yesterday's paper. But if you look at that, there's a Nazi guard that the picture was in the paper today is going to trial tomorrow. I don't think there was a whether it's out of guilt or whether whatever reason, no one was addressing or recognizing the atrocities of the Holocaust until the United States announced that we are going to memorialize this and we're going to build a museum. And now, there's a tremendous growth in the number of museums, like get the one here, right? So, and all over the country, which, by the way, has horribly affected fundraising for us in Washington, but that's another story. Everybody's got their own local museum now. We can't get any money there, but again, that isn't my problem either. So it's somebody else's now. But it was this recognition of the Holocaust, and that caused this to happen. And no other country was going to do that. I mean, Great Britain was not going to do it. I mean, I'm not going to get in the same trouble, Lee. I'm not going to get in the same trouble the FBI director did. But there was complicity everywhere, obviously in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, with the Nazis. And so that's why I said it might have been out of guilt, but nobody acknowledged it. There was none of the perpetrators were being arrested or chased at all anywhere in Western Europe at all, until the United States did what it did, and it put this museum on that mall, and it said, we're going to acknowledge this, and we're going to do what we need to do. And slowly but surely after that, there's now, there's a museum in Poland, there's a museum in Berlin, there's a museum in London. There's now, an acknowledgement of Germany has a museum, but they actually are not hiding their camps anymore. They're building memorials in their camps. None of this would have happened had the United States not taken, I think, the lead in showing the world that we need to deal with this and make sure it doesn't happen again. So it was tremendously important that we do that we did do it. And of course, again, the way it happened is when they conceived of this, they gave the Jewish leadership in this country, they gave them that piece of land and said, we'll give you the land. It's on the mall. Well, it's one small building off the mall. And by the way, when I got to D.C., I said my main goal was going to be buy that Yates building so we could take it over and build all the way out to the mall. And the President of the United States could not get the Agriculture Department to give up that building. They just weren't going to do it. So that Yates building is still there today. And I said I was a total failure. But I never got the Yates building. I figured I could do that. But we literally, everybody up to and including President Bush, said, we got to have that building. And they said, we're not giving it to you. We got it full. Go build us a whole other building for the Department of Agriculture, which they wanted, and we'll give you that building. The government wasn't going to do that. So that was my biggest failure. I never got that building. So we're still not on the mall, but quite. But that was the importance of it.
Pretty close to the mall.
Pretty close.
You get the mall tourists.
So they had to raise the money privately, raised $150 million privately. And there were a bunch of rules, which are really interesting. They wanted no corporate money. Remember, these are the survivors, and they were going to put up the money, and they did. And so I hope I'm not, if there's anybody in this room that was part of that decision process, I apologize, but they wanted no corporate money because they didn't want to have the name of corporations inside that museum, and they were afraid they're going to have naming rights. And so no corporate money at all. They refused to take money at that time from anybody that was involved with Germany, right? So, some of the major corporations, some of the Mercedes-Benzes of the world that were offering tons of money, and they just refused all of that. So it was all done individually, and they raised $150 million to build a museum.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and also with federal funds.
And the federal, well, no, there was no federal funding in the creation of the museum. There's a lot of, confusion's not the right word, but just
Please
share
clarify.
this. The way the system works is that the federal government gave us enough money for what they consider the opening and closing every day of the museum. So, and when I got there, it was $32 million a year. Mm-hmm. Remember, there's no ticket sales, right? So, plus the security cost. Mm-hmm. And the museum is considered the third most likely target behind the White House and the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Because if a terrorist wants to do something, go do it to where the Jews are, which was the one incident where we did have the killing at the museum. I can tell you that story about how naive I am, but I'll tell you that story too in a second. But so at any rate, every time, so all of the research, all of the archival work, all of the programming that we had to do had to be funded privately. And so when I got there, the budget was $55 million. When I left, we were up to $75 million, and we had to raise the rest. And then we got into the period of time, of course, when budgets were frozen, and they would never cut the U.S. Holocaust Museum, but when everybody else was getting cut, but we didn't get any increases, so the rest of that money had to be raised privately. So I think today they're still getting right at $33 million plus the security cost. Mm-hmm. So I'll tell you about how smart I am. The day of the shooting, it just so happened, the guy that got shot was the most phenomenal guy in the whole world. And it was during the period of time when my baseball team stunk. And so he used to give me a really tough time every day, and I'd see him every day. But it just so happened, and I used to go say hello to him after lunch every day. And the day of the shooting, we were up on Capitol Hill testifying, mm-hmm. we being Sarah Bloomfield, who is the executive director, and I. And somebody we're underground, somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, "Come quick. There's been an incident at the museum." So I said, inside, outside, I don't know anything. One person, many people, was it, we don't know anything, just come quick. So this is the funny part. I said, okay, call them and tell them not to do anything until I get there. Okay, hello. So we walk out of the Capitol, we get in the car, and my cell phone is ringing, okay? And it's people in Dallas and people, they're all calling me saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay? You're okay." At which point we turn on Independence Avenue and I see helicopters everywhere. I mean, don't tell anybody what's going on, right? I'm the last person in the world that's going to find out. So we go up Independence Avenue. By the time we got there, half of the United States Congress was there, every major network in the world. I mean, they were there in 5 minutes. And it was a tragedy, and it was an old guy who was mad at President Obama for having cut his benefits, and he couldn't live anymore. So he decided he was going to kill himself, but before he did, he was going to go kill as many Jews as he could. Well, he had an old single-shot rifle that was 50 years old. But he gets to the museum, and he doesn't even shoot anybody. He doesn't get inside the door. He shoots the African-American who is at the front door. So, tragedy, but interestingly enough, it's the only incident that has ever happened at that museum, which is amazing when you consider that we're considered to be the third. And that security system, which cost at that time, when I left, it was about $12 million a year that we spent on security, was unbelievable to protect it.
It's
So-
terrifying and tragic, and also
Yeah.
such a relief that that's the only incident
That
there.
incident, right. We were just afraid every day.
I absolutely believe
Do
it.
you remember the point, y'all might remember, when a bunch of the Russian missiles had been stolen, and they said they'd been sold here in the United States, and they were going to be aimed at the U.S. Holocaust Museum. I mean, that's the kind of thing that kept us, up at night. And of course, it didn't happen. I don't know whatever happened to the missiles, but I don't know if they're in the United States or not. But they never were aimed at the museum. I'm sorry.
No. I'm sure that there's a lot of talk of rising anti-Semitism in Europe, which I'm sure keeps up the current director and the current chairman of the board. And I wonder if today, of course, the attack on the kosher supermarket in Paris in January, following the attack on Charlie Hebdo, is still fresh in our minds. And here in Missouri, as you and I were discussing earlier, we are still thinking about the death of the state auditor, Tom Schweik, following the whisper campaign, the anti-Semitic whisper campaign against him. So do you think the Memorial Museum, do you think the Holocaust Memorial Museum faces a particular role at this moment?
Well, I think, again, and this is probably the most difficult decision, and we had this discussion at lunch, and I said to Lee, I don't envy you in having to make the same kinds of decisions. And one of the main reasons that I'm so fascinated by the Danforth Center, and why I'm so proud to have made what I hope is a fairly significant contribution, pledge, right, to the center, is that you're dealing with these issues a little different than we had, but the toughest decision for the museum, again, goes back to your original question. Mm-hmm. Are you a Jewish museum or are you not? Mm-hmm. To the extent that that you're not a Jewish museum, that you are a museum of the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. You're a museum not of genocide, but related to genocide. Then you have to address these things, mm-hmm. but you have to address them in a way where you're showing what happens if you don't do something. Mm-hmm. I think the museum has spoken out on those issues, but not actively engaged. Because remember, you're using federal dollars, mm-hmm. and federal dollars are not given to you to be used to protect any single, ethnic minority, because we're not the only ones, right? You didn't see the museum stepping out in any of the human rights abuses in other countries. You haven't seen the museum, I don't think, actively involved in any of the issues that really are pertinent, like the ones here in Missouri. Not only the suicide, which we talked about quite a bit at lunch, because I'm fascinated with this, but also some of the issues that have affected, other ethnic minorities, and we're seeing police shootings, daily now that are obviously not. Well, I'm not going to get in that either, but arguably could be race-based in some of those things. And so those are all real issues. And what's the role of the Holocaust Museum? If you're a Jewish museum, then you have to get actively involved in some of these issues of anti-Semitism. If you're not, you have to make people aware of what happens if you tolerate these things and if you allow them to continue, which is just what happened. I think you heard me say earlier, Hitler was one of the most brilliant marketers that I have. I mean, you talk about a guy that knew how to use focus groups. He didn't just start mass killing. I mean, he market tested it to see how the world would react to it, how the Germans would react to it, and the rest of the world would react to it. And that's the same thing that's going on now. The bad guys are trying to see what the world is willing to tolerate. And that's what this museum has to speak out against. I think, particularly just speaking out again on the Hebdo issue. I mean, there is no question about the attack on the supermarket in France. We're having same issues down. We have had them in Brazil. We've had them in South America. You're starting to see many more instances of anti-Semitism here in this country. So I think the museum, this is my perspective, and I think my successor has, and I know that that executive director feels the same way. We have to let the world know what can happen if we let this go. If you look at what the FBI director said last week, and I will tell you that the entire plebe class at the Naval Academy comes to the museum. And that, by the way, was one of my most thrilling days. I used to come in extra early. They would bring the whole plebe class down at the end of their first week of school. And they would line up, and there they are in their dress whites at 7:30 in the morning. They bring them down from Annapolis in front of the museum, and they would all go through the museum. The police department, Washington, D.C. Police Department, everyone, because of their leadership, is brought to that museum to see what happens if you let this thing get away from you, if you listen to orders that are not right, or if you don't pay attention to these instances and let them grow. So those are the continued things. Those are the kind of programming that private money was paying for. Mm-hmm. And some of those programs, as a matter of fact, I don't know if they're still doing it here, but the program we started with the police department, the first place it went after Washington was to St. Louis. And I don't know if they're still, y'all still doing that here, Kent? Tomorrow.
Wow.
Oh, interesting. Got it. 10th year. Yeah. Wow. And they're doing the program in Houston now, and so I hope we sending folks down here to help with that. Good. So, sure. That's what we've got to do, and that's the job we have to do, and that's why we have to continue to raise the money in Washington so that we can allow these programs to happen.
Absolutely. I think you were telling us at lunch that you reached out to the FBI and suggested that they come to the Holocaust Museum.
That actually, I think, started. The FBI, I think, was the first ones there. And that started under Sessions, and I think that might have been, I don't know when they started those programs. The police department program started while I was there. I think the other program FBI program might have started before.
Okay.
Because I think I saw it when I got there. So.
It's very impressive programming, very important, absolutely. And to that end, and in line with some of what you've told us about the relationship between the federal government and the Memorial Museum, I wonder if I can ask you if you see what you see as the connections between the U.S. government and the museum, which you've told us a little bit about, but also do you see the museum fulfilling a particular American mission?
Well, the basic answer to that is if you believe in American exceptionalism, then we are there to reinforce that America is the leader in the world, and that we were the first to openly acknowledge and recognize the need to deal with this issue to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and to show the world that we are there to make sure that it doesn't happen again, and that's why it's a constant reminder. And the fact that it's federally funded means that every American has the ability to come into that museum, and they're not constrained by having to pay for a ticket to do that. And I remember when the sniper was around D.C. and of course, no one was coming to Washington, and the crowds dissipated. And I remember Sarah Bloomfield, who, by the way, is the single most marvelous executive director anyone. She is just incredible. And she said to me, "What are we going to do?" And I said, "Well, we can't have a sale. We don't charge for tickets, right? But we just have to live through this, because it's not that people aren't coming to our museum, it's that they're not coming to Washington. If they don't come to Washington, we know what, of the number of people coming to Washington, we got a good idea how many are going to come here. And they are, and they come in increasing numbers. So again, if the United States government had not done what they did, and if they had not made this available the way they're making it available, I don't know where we'd be. I don't know where worldwide recognition of the Holocaust would be. Would there ever have been the museums built in the other countries? Or were they, like they have since World War II, followed our lead? I'd like to think they're following our lead. And again, to me, it's a perfect example of American exceptionalism, and why we have to show the world that we're here to make sure that kind of activity doesn't
That's
happen.
fascinating. Thank you.
So-
Maybe I'll ask you one more question, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Looking back now that you're several years out from this role, and have certainly had time to reflect on it, is there a moment, perhaps you've told us already, but what would be the most challenging or the most rewarding part of your role as the chairman of the board?
That's a great question. The biggest challenge, I think, was facing this transition from the mission of the museum when it was built and its first 10 years. I was there for the second 10 years. And this migration from the survivor generation to the post-survivor, and how do we make the museum real? How do we portray this legacy to teach America and to keep it live and to keep it real and to not make it into, again, and as I said, if you want to see a genocide, go down the street to the American Indian Museum, right? And the food's better down there. So, but they just tell the story of the American Indian, and lots of people go to the restaurant, but they're not going up to the museum. How are we going to keep this alive? It's a great restaurant. So our job, my obligation to the survivors was to make sure that no one ever forgets. And we couldn't do that unless we kept it alive. So the digitization and all of those things. And dealing with the survivors and convincing them that we were going to do this. And they had to let us do that because it was in their best interest. To me, was probably the biggest challenge. And the biggest reward to me, without question, was seeing the smiles on the faces of the survivors as we continued their. I mean, I'll look at the books that, one book after another that the survivors have signed to me, thanking me for what we accomplished at the museum, and taking this, on from the battles that we had in the early days, when again, they didn't want this to reflect anything but their particular story. And the way we were able to migrate it. And we couldn't have done it without, again, Sarah and the most phenomenal staff you could ever imagine. I used to take the Sunday night flight in every Sunday night, and I'd say I never wanted to look at the museum because it'd be 10 o'clock at night and all the lights were still on. Everybody was still working. I mean, no one has ever been more devoted, and the staff that Sarah put together there is the most amazing staff I could ever have imagined. And and they were 200% behind what I wanted to accomplish when I got there. And I said to President Bush when, I said, it's time for a non-survivor to take this over, and we've got to take it to the next generation, or we're going to end up like these other museums, and that's not a good thing. This is special because this is all about us. So to me, that was the challenge, and the reward was just, to this day, looking at the books on my shelf and opening them and saying, thank you for what you did for us and that kind of thing. Because I think truly affected that transition. And as I said to Sarah this morning, they broke ground last week on a new archival building, which we had to have. And Sarah was thanking me in an email this morning on the plane, and I said, hey, Sarah, I'm just the lucky recipient of you and your phenomenal management team. So it really, we had the backing. We didn't have the backing of the community, but we had the backing of the management team that knew where this had to go, and putting into place the folks that we did and the cooperation we had with the White House in putting a board in that was supportive of that effort. Again, I don't know how many more years I'll get to see the smiles on the survivors' faces, but I can tell you that was all the reward I ever needed.
It sounds like the management team and all of us who have benefited from the museum
Right.
have a lot to thank you for. So thank you.